Welcome back to MSNBC. I'm Stephanie Ruhle. We're going to focus more on the dramatic escalation of tensions between North Korea and the United States. NBC News has learned the Pentagon has prepared a specific strike plan for a preemptive attack on the rogue nation if the president orders one. NBC's Cynthia McFadden reports the B-1 bomber is key to the plan. Since the end of May, they've accelerated their training, conducted 11 practice runs, including one on this past Monday. The highly sophisticated strike package is designed to be largely invisible to facilitate a sneak attack, and multiple sources say the targets are approximately 24 North Korean missile launch sites and support facilities, which intelligence officials tell NBC News they feel confident they've accurately identified. Joining me now, MSNBC national security analyst and foreign policy contributor Evelyn Farkas and former Secretary of U.S. Air Force Deborah Lee James. Evelyn, let's start with you. President Trump threatens fire and fury, but you say sentiment like that makes the United States look weak to places like North Korea. Others have said it's fire with fire. You're speaking a language that Kim Jong-un understands.
It may be the language Kim Jong-un understands because it's the language, Stephanie, that he and his father, have traditionally used. The underdog is the one that, barks loudest to try to keep the big dog away. The big dog can afford to be quiet and calm and understand that if it wants to use its massive military power, it can prevail, but it's not really wise to do so. So, getting to your question about preemptive strikes, that would be highly dangerous because the North Koreans would strike back, but not at us because they know they can't take us down. They'd strike at our allies in South Korea or maybe the Japanese.
Secretary James, North Korea, of course, to Evelyn's point, did respond because President Trump, with fire and fury, does speak their language, saying that only absolute force is going to work on Trump. And you say it's time for everybody to tone down the testosterone and keep working on diplomacy. Do you actually think that's going to happen? We're talking about Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un.
Well, I hope so, Stephanie, because that kind of indelicate talk I don't think is helpful at this juncture. In my opinion, the Korean Peninsula is nearing a tinderbox proportion. Everyone is on very, very high alert, and we know from looking back in our own history, the history of the world, that miscalculation fueled by tough-talking leaders can cause miscalculation and create a warfare environment. So it's time to tone it back a bit and double down on diplomacy and working with our allies as well as others around the world, which, by the way, there's been some what I think is excellent progress with the recent actions in the UN imposing tough new sanctions on North Korea. We need to make sure those sanctions are airtight or as close to it as we can possibly do so
and enforced.
And parlay it from there.
Those sanctions need to be enforced.
Yeah.
Evelyn, I want to talk about the new op-ed you put out in the New York Times where you wrote, the only solution is a multi-pronged strategy aimed at containing the threat posed by North Korea. None of these tensions are a surprise. It was the last point President Obama made to President Trump when they had that meeting at the White House, how serious the threat from North Korea is. So what do you think this multi-pronged strategy should look like?
Well, I think so. First of all, Stephanie, it's really important to remember the reason the North Korean regime has these weapons is to keep us out, to make sure that we don't conduct any regime change. And under this new leader who was raised, educated basically in Switzerland, he's also undergone a little bit of economic change. So there's very little market reform, right? So if we look at that, and we look at what we've done in the past, we've employed parts of the prong at different times. But what we need, first of all, is deterrence. There's been a lot of talk about that. Conventional deterrence, nuclear deterrence, all the stuff our military is really good at doing. Second, pressure, the sanctions. That's a great step. And as you said, they need to be enforced. Third, diplomacy, so that we tell the North Koreans, look, we're putting this pressure on you and we're deterring you because we think you're a threat to international safety and security. And then the last part, again, we can offer a carrot. If the North Koreans agree to at least freeze all their testing right now, sit down and negotiate with us about the overall situation, then we can start to talk to them about incentives. And here I think we can work with the Chinese on helping the North Koreans do some market reform, some privatization, move a little bit further along than they have already, which they understand is the key to keeping long-term power. And whether we like it or not, I think containment is our best option right now.
All right, you know what I don't like? What Secretary James said. Secretary James, You said there is a military option. It's doable, but with bad consequences. I don't feel good about bad consequences. What do they look like?
Well, the military's job is always to provide options to the commander-in-chief should the military be called upon to do the job. So there have been options on the table for years, and the options remain. The problem is, no matter what military action the U.S. might take, there would certainly be retaliation on the part of the North Koreans. And there are many, many thousands of artillery pieces in North Korea aimed at Seoul, aimed at South Korea, and millions of people, including some U.S. troops and U.S. families, live close to the environment of Seoul. And so any military option, though I'm sure the United States would ultimately prevail, would have death and destruction associated with it, which is why I come back to this is time to double down on diplomacy, having the military option always there, but focus should be diplomacy.
Death, destruction, diplomacy. We're going to end on the 3 Ds. Ladies, thank you so much. I just want to put into perspective, imagine if you had the kind of intelligence President Trump has, if you had all the information and you chose to hit the links. All right, up next, for a second day in a row, President Trump taking aim at members of his own party. This I must talk about. It baffles me. After he made an unexpected endorsement in a Senate race, is the president talking tough or trying to distance himself from a sinking ship? The question is, who's on the ship? Which one is sinking?